Hey, everybody, welcome to The Blacklist, the show where we interview the elite. Today, we have Bryan Peña to my right. He is the CEO of Defiant Solutions. Now, for people that don't know you, right, what is Defiant Solutions and how did you come up with the name? Which I read about it, but I want you to tell people.
Defiant Solutions, we are a boutique consultancy focused on the future of work. So, regardless of all of the talk around artificial intelligence and the impact it's going to have on work, there needs to always be a human-to-human connection.
Love
And
that.
what we specialize is helping large enterprises, startups, and individuals themselves get the most out of that intersection of humans and technology.
Yeah.
Because it's an incredibly evolving space, and no matter what happens, it's going to be a part of what we all do moving forward. I've been in this field of non-traditional work for about 25 years, managing the extended workforce or non-employee workforce or non-traditional workforce for companies like Universal Studios, Avery Dennison, Vivendi, Universal, Seagrams. And then I was a researcher for 11 years where we studied how companies are using people, how they're using human capital. And I was the chief of revenue for a company called MBO Partners where we specialized in supporting the independent workforce.
Yeah.
And then we started Defiant Solutions in 2020. We've had incredible growth ever since. The name Defiant, I think I have to get into it. I have to give my fiance credit for this. We were actually in a airport on our way to New Orleans. And I had been going through some transition and frustrations with my work, and I've always wanted to start my own business.
Yeah.
And so literally we sat down in the airport at LAX, came up with the name Defiant. It was her idea because we want to defy and do things very differently. That's been part of my nature, my career path moving forward. And we opened up the computer, got LegalZoom, and got started right there in the airport. And since then, we've had wonderful success working with some of the largest companies in the world and some incredibly exciting startups on generating what the future work is going to look like.
Yeah.
And now, since I've been in the space for so long, I've been an economics nerd for a long time. We've always talked about how labor and the future of work is something that we'll know we will have arrived at an industry when you see it on the head of the Harvard Business Review. And now you can't turn on the TV, you can't open a newspaper, you can't look at a business magazine or even a social magazine where the nature of employment and what it means to generate income for yourself is being redefined constantly.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just really a privilege and an honor to be some small part of what that narrative is going to be.
Yeah. No, I love that. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. And in 2020, that was during the pandemic. Is that right?
Yes.
So, and you guys started during a pretty volatile time.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Why at that time were you like, I need to make the leap during the pandemic?
Well, I think there's I've always been afraid of getting too comfortable, and I've always really thrived in chaos. It's been one of my things.
Yeah.
And that's again a theme of a lot of the work that we do is helping people maximize the economics of chaos.
Yeah.
But I'm not getting any younger. And if you're never going to make the plunge, you have to do it. And I think about my father, somebody who was the most successful insurance salesman in Northern California, because at the time in the 70s, he was the only one who spoke Spanish. And he was very successful, but he always regretted that he never opened his own agency.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge believer in trusting my ability. And my ability to generate income is something I've never really questioned.
Yep.
I believe that the universe provides. So I didn't see it necessarily as a risk. I think to me taking a job would have been a risk.
I like that.
And I think that statistically, data shows that people who run their own businesses, run their business, are infinitely happier than employees on almost every single success metric. And that is kind of the trend that we want to ride. And that we really evangelize is the notion of people choosing to exchange their competency for currency, as it were, in any of the multitude of ways that they can do it.
Yeah. Walk me through some of the obstacles when you did start, because I'm assuming it wasn't all just rainbows and and it was great. What obstacles did you have throughout those years?
Well, I think a couple of things. I always joke because I work with a lot of individuals who are starting their own business. Part of my practice is to work not just with enterprises, but with individuals who are developing their own kind of foray into running a company. It's the highs are higher and the lows are lower. So and you have to be ready for that. Some days you're going to be the smartest man in the world. You're going to feel like you have every answer. It comes off the tip of your tongue, and that you are able to answer no matter what questions that you were the smartest person and oh my gosh, they should be paying me $1 million for this hour of my time.
Yeah.
And then other days where you don't have that spark, you become addicted to it. And the hard thing to me is knowing that there's the highs are higher and the lows are going to feel lower, right? Um, I wasn't prepared for that because when you have a job, we have a career, and you're working in an organization. It's often very staid, and you kind of know where you fit in the ecosystem,
Right.
and then you have a tendency to get comfortable. Um, you know, being uncomfortable to me is something that I learned really early on in my career, and so, but I still was unprepared for that. And then another thing that I I wasn't prepared for was the invoice cycle. That's something that really was an
Oh,
obstacle.
100%.
The,
Yep, yep.
the invoices go on the 24th, and then they're due on the 7th, and you're certain that no one's going to pay, and
Yeah.
so and then you're back to those low lows, right?
Yeah, yep.
There's a story, if you don't mind. I want to tell a story about
Go ahead.
how I started. So, my career, and this is really the kernel of why we have Defiant, is I studied economics and theater in college, and so I moved to Los Angeles to be of all things an actor, and I did that for 6 years, and I was relatively not successful, but certainly had my shot.
Yeah.
Anyway, through a combination of circumstances, I got my first corporate job working at Universal Studios. There was a producer who knew me, and he gave me a shot. And the thing that I remember was riding up the elevator to the 30th floor where our office was, and I was terrified, terrified. I had my olive green suit on, double breasted. Come on, let's get
Beautiful.
yeah. Seriously, you just envision it in your head,
Yeah.
and my knees were shaking. I was certain that someday they were going to find out that I had no idea what I was doing. And I remember going into my manager's office, and I said to him, I said, his name was Rick. Rick Smith was his name. And I said, Rick, I come to work, I'm scared, I'm terrified. And he said something that really influenced the trajectory of my career and my life. He said, that's just what it feels to not know something.
Yeah.
Become addicted to that feeling, and you'll be fine. And then he said another thing that in that same conversation that really affected me and also really affects the way that Defiant does business, which is I hire the person, not the resume.
Mm.
And if you think about those two sort of concepts, recognizing that the breakthrough comes from chaos and being uncomfortable, and recognizing that people are people as opposed to their past or their history or their resume or their education, has been the foundation of everything that I've done for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
And so it's really been a pleasure to have to talk to people like yourself and to interact with organizations who are challenging that assumption about how do you make the most of people. And we're really selective with the companies we work with because we're not just about shaving a nickel off of every hour,
Yeah.
but trying to make sure that we create equity and fairness and equal opportunity, and through all of the ways that people can use to leverage their careers and how companies can leverage them.
Yeah. And how does that look like? So if a company is like, looking to have that inside of their organization and they hire you guys, how are you determining, or how are you looking for certain things that, will kind of help the company grow into more of an inclusion factor and things like that?
Well, there's a lot of different ways in which you can do that, but I think we work primarily with providers in that space. So we help them develop offerings that will appeal to enterprise and individuals. So when we get started with a company, it's usually a pretty in-depth process. We start with like a 25-item review.
Yeah.
We look at their overall strategic goals, where they've been, where they're going. We look at their client base, their industry focus, how they leverage technology, what are the things that make them truly unique. And then we do a really confrontational review process, because so often people think things are unique or secret sauce that really aren't. And really focus on those differentiators, and we try to get some agreement on where we feel we can fit best fit in the overall ecosystem, and who are our competitors and where are significant areas of opportunity.
Yeah.
Once we get that sort of a deep understanding, we start to get involved more in the client's profile. Look at your client base. How are you making money? What's a non-performing client? And then we start to identify areas of, almost invariably, there's area of opportunities in how their existing client base is being utilized. How are they servicing their client base?
Yeah.
And are they focusing on the right things? So often organizations get fascinated with the shiny penny. They want to implement like voice activated ordering when all they want is for the software to accept credit cards the right way or something.
Right.
Because that stuff, while the blocking and tackling, as we say, is important, it's boring. And so, really confronting those assumptions and working with them to develop those offerings has been part of our process. Um, because I have been an enterprise buyer for 11 years and I advised enterprise buyers for another 12, I have a really deep understanding about how large companies buy.
Yeah.
And working with them to develop those offerings have yielded tremendous results. Like one of the clients that I've engaged is a company based in London. They had no enterprise clients. They signed up 2 within the first 6 months, right? Another one of my clients, they're a technology that has really approached the market in a unique way, but they were unfocused. So we were able to identify a really proprietary marketing niche that will be very specific to them, so that they can win, play where they win. Eventually you can take on the world, but the problem that people don't realize is that when people buy something, when organizations buy something, there's a whole set of rules that go around how they do it. But the assumption that people need to remember is they're not picking the best solution. They're picking the one that has the fewest risk, the least element of risk to it. So if I'm running a huge project to select a technology for my company, I'm not looking for the best one. I'm looking for the least reasons to say no.
It's true.
Right?
Yep.
And so if you start with that assumption that, okay, what are the reasons someone would say no to us, which is often a really uncomfortable conversation. Because if somebody is, if you're running an organization, if you're working within a company, you often don't want to deal with those things that, what parts of your baby are ugly.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have the answer necessarily, but you have to recognize that those are going to be risks. And then another thing that we really advise companies on is to create their messaging to really be appropriate for the size of the yes. This is something I say all the time. So often when you're trying to, an organization or an individual or a company, when you're trying to make a decision, most decisions are overwhelming. And it's very, very difficult.
Yep.
And in organizations, when you're making a decision, period, any kind, every decision means your career, right? Every decision means your career. Because if you have a bad decision, you pick a bad supplier, the supplier doesn't deliver, that's your supplier. You're never going to get another project again. You're going to get fired. And then, and I always try to raise the stakes as high as possible. So my ability to feed my family is predicated on you as a client or as a client partner or as an individual doing what you say you're going to do. If you're not going to do those things, then all these other negative downstreams are.
Right.
And so to me, the highest possible stakes would be to focus on those areas where, you can identify the least amount of no's. And I completely lost my train of thought. Where was I going? What was the question again?
So, well, I don't remember the question anymore, but I do remember.
I ramble on. I told you it's a warning.
No, it's good. What you were essentially saying is like how you're kind of helping companies.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So we work collaboratively to identify small yeses. With this particular client, we were able to identify a very narrow niche that they can be successful in. They were the obvious choice. And then from there, we build strategies to what we say land and expand. Start with a small opportunity and grow it into more and more things.
Yeah. Walk me through, like, for example, when you helped out your client that, signed on 2 enterprise clients.
Yep.
I'm not familiar with that. So enterprise clients, I'm assuming, are
Fortune 500 organizations. Yes.
How do they buy? And when they do, is it? I'm assuming it's like a lot more. It's like 6-figure contracts or yeah. So walk me through that, because that'll be super valuable to a lot of business owners that are
Okay. Yeah. No. And this is exactly where we fit in the equation. And we are able to help companies of all size develop strategies to successfully penetrate enterprise type buying.
Yeah.
So most large organizations have a procurement department. It's called any number of things: strategic sourcing, procurement, whatever. Within those procurement departments, they have what are called category managers. Okay, category managers have levels of responsibility for a given category, and categories are broken out usually pretty consistently. So, for example, you might have, I've been a category manager where I manage global purchasing for IT and software, right? Because that's a very specific domain. IT and software. Professional services is often a large one. That includes temporary help, independent contractors, security guards, consulting services, the whole 9 yards. So within those categories, those individuals are responsible for generating savings and managing risk, as well as implementing efficiencies. So there are really only 4 elements: quality, efficiency, cost, and risk, right?
Yeah.
Those are the elements of the buying equation. And so each of those people are responsible for what's called a book of spend. So, for example, one of my jobs, I had a spend responsibility over $1 billion. Okay. And so on a yearly basis, I was expected to optimize a certain percentage of that spend every year. And using a relatively process, usually it's called the AT Kearney 7-step process is a standard process for how you buy. But, once you develop a deep category understanding, that's where you spend your career managing that for the company.
Yeah.
And then what will happen on every year, you identify opportunities or inefficiencies within the company. And then around September or, September on during budget cycle, you'll say, next year, I'm going to work on this. And then so you have to put together a project charter, build executive support, all these other sorts of things to get a buy-in, institutional buy-in for that particular project. Thereafter, you run a sourcing initiative, and the sourcing initiative, could be anywhere from 6 months to 3 months to simple, just putting out a request for bid or something.
Yeah.
The process by which people do that is called RFX. So it's RFP, RFQ, request for proposal, request for quote, request for information.
Yep.
So usually the way in which you would do a large initiative, let's say I was doing a large consulting project, I would start with building the business case, and then I'd sell it internally. Okay, and this is something that people don't realize. The role of a category manager, the role in purchasing is actually a sales job. It's a sales job because you have to, very rarely do you work with a mandate. So you have to do the feel, felt, found, find requirements, identify the key stakeholders, what are their pain points, what are their qualifications, whether the things that they're going to need.
For the own internal company?
For their own internal company. So really what you're doing is you're selling yourself.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you're getting in between existing and entrenched relationships. So, I remember I did a travel RFP and I just, the incumbent was way expensive and giving bad service and it had been in place for 42 years.
Oh, shit.
So, that's a fun one to do. But
Yeah.
but the point is it's a sales job. You have to outline a better future than what they have.
Right.
And sometimes you have the ability to do big sticks. So once you get this buy-in and you sell your solution and you sell yourself, then you go out to market. Okay, then you'll meet with suppliers or prospective suppliers to develop a feeling of who the best ones are, or who the ones that are going to align culturally, or who the ones who are leading in the organization.
Can I stop you right there real
Yes.
quick? How do you so when they put out the feelers for
Yeah.
and for suppliers, where are they looking?
That's a great point. Usually, and this is another interesting thing. Usually, they're going to find them by searching the internet, searching any industry trades, whatever. The thing that people don't realize, and this is a real quick aside,
Yeah.
selling to large enterprises. When I was managing my purchasing group and I was a commodity manager, I would probably get, I'm not kidding, at least 120 phone calls a day,
Damn.
and I'd have probably several thousand emails.
Yeah.
And so the traditional sort of consumer sales strategy just doesn't work.
Yep.
It doesn't work. It's not, and that's also a part of what we do is we educate these startups on how to sell because it's a different selling proposition. So, and there are a couple reasons why, but the traditional sales metrics, if I was running a startup, I would say, what's the cost to acquire? How many phone calls does it take to do this? This many phone calls, you run your sales team.
Yeah, exactly.
How many phone calls to take this many meetings to get this many contracts, to get this many closes, to translate this much revenue? So you have this funnel that gets narrower and narrow, right?
Mhm. Yep.
At the enterprise level, that stuff just doesn't work. Because when I sign a deal, I'm locked into a 3, 5 year, 6 contract. And so you calling me does nothing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to bat anybody. I mean, I'll maybe put you on my list eventually when it goes out to bid, but not. So usually you ask other category managers, other people in the industry, you attend trade shows, you see who's active in the media, right? And you just do that sort of research. And then one of the things I always like to do was to meet collaboratively with providers and say, hey, we're going to do a bid or an event, and then tell me what are all the things that you need to know to give me a comprehensive bid.
Yeah.
Because I'm a huge believer in, you want the best price, you need to be the best customer. And the way you be the best customer is having a deep understanding of what my supplier partners are going to need so that they can be consistent with what they give me.
Yeah.
So I was obsessive about that part. So I would ask that question of 10, 20, 30 suppliers. I would get all these different requirement documents, consolidate that into one master file, go back to the client organization, or at this time when I was managing my enterprise, and saying, okay, these are all the data points, provide those data points to the suppliers and say, now come back with a proposal. So You do an RFP, and then usually the RFP has some decision criteria if it's well written. If it's not well written, they just look at how thick it is and then go to the back page and look at pricing. Bad procurement's bad procurement.
Yeah.
And then after that, you'll do a series of interviews and presentations to senior leadership, and then you go through the contracting process, which is always a lot of fun.
Yeah. And how long? So because I work with other people that have Fortune 500 companies, and they say the sales cycle is long.
It is very long.
Yeah. So, what's your experience with that? How long does it usually take to get a yes or contract signed?
It depends. It depends on the urgency, the pain field. I always have another speech that I do about how the drivers of change are only two things: pain or scarcity.
Yeah.
Right? That's the only thing that's going to drive change. Either you're feeling tremendous pain or there's a lot of scarcity. You could argue scarcity is a form of pain, but pain. Anyway, so it depends. Sometimes if it's an obvious choice of pricing, there's the right sort of incentives, and then we can talk about that in just a second. It takes longer or less time than others. I've had other contracts with a client that took almost 2 years to get signed because of any number of reasons. One of the things that is also something that we do is, and thank you for bringing that up, Ulysses, is you have this notion of, time to value, time to contract. You get the yes, but the contract takes too long to be signed.
Yep.
So what we do, and because we've been doing this for so long, we work with organizations on how you can build incentives into your contract structure to get that signature faster. Because oftentimes there is no consequence for waiting.
100%.
There's no consequence for saying no. It's the easiest thing in the world to say no. No
Yep.
is so easy. There's no risk in saying no, right? And if you recognize the human nature, the natural predilection to say no, and time is a negotiation lever because the supplier, the business person often has more to lose by waiting.
Yep.
You've some of these bids are incredibly expensive to respond to, and so I used to use, when I was negotiating on the first half of the enterprise, I would use time to my advantage because I could take as long as I needed.
Yeah.
But there are ways to accelerate that, and that's part of our practice.
Well, dude, I'd love to know one at least. Yeah, because this is solid. This is good information.
I think I'm gonna put this down. Oh, there we go. That's better. These things are killing me.
Yeah, see, I need mine up because I
feel like I have my shoulders, my ears.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the ones that I liked and I recommend. It's often a little challenging. Is I used to do what I call prepaid discounts. Okay, this is something that you use in very large contracts to get around certain. Anyway, I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes. If I start to go down a rabbit hole, please stop me. But prepaid discounts. So you give a fiscal incentive for somebody to sign sooner rather than later. So early signature discount. So if let's say there's one contract I did, it was $60 million, right? And this is way back in my career when I was negotiating of all thing. I'm going to date myself. DVD cardboard cases.
Holy crap!
I was negotiating that. It was a big contract. But anyway, so one of the things that the supplier did to get us to transition earlier was offer a prepaid discount. So they signed us a check for a signing bonus for $1 million, right? And that $1 million was essentially a prepaid or front-loaded discount in return for certain monetary performance. So if we guaranteed $60 million a year, for example, they would price it at whatever, 59 million or whatever that was.
Yeah.
But they would give us $1 million, and then we'd buy that down as throughout the year, right? So in a way, it's a really nice mechanism to drive incentives, because from a procurement side, the way our job was measured was capturing savings and closing deals.
Right.
So if I can't close a contract, I can't capture savings. But if I have a signing bonus, guess what? I get to go to my boss. Here's $1 million. I'm employed for another year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, well, that's sorry, were you gonna keep going?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great information. I'm loving this interview because me as a business owner, a lot of people that are watching are business owners.
Yes.
Sometimes people penny pinch, or they try to be greedy with the contract, but usually when people do that, they could lose the deal, right?
Yeah.
If they're just focusing on price.
Yeah.
And you're doing a very good job of explaining, look, you can insert incentives that make it a win-win for both, right? And the longer they take, then that won't happen anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the thing that I always use when I advise companies on using this particular strategy is that the last thing that they want to do is go to their boss and ask for that money to be paid back.
Yep.
Right. And so
Mm.
That piece right there is a really valuable consideration and a strategy that you can use to do that. Another thing um, to remember is the notion that low price doesn't always win,
Yep.
right?
I was also gonna talk about that because yeah, because like right now you're talking about how like yes, it's a win if you save money, but at the same time, is it just? I'm assuming it's not just about money.
Oh, not at all, not at
Yeah.
all. So you know, there are bad business owners and there are good business owners. There are good executives and bad executives. There are good procurement people and there are bad procurement people. Bad procurement people focus on the wrong things. And that's I reference the people who write the large RFP that no one ever reads. They just go to the last page and they pick the top three bottom providers.
Yeah.
Um, Good strategy has one thinner proposal processes, right? So it's a much more concentrated process because you respect the time and investment of your potential partners. And two, it doesn't focus on cost as the primary driver, right? Because in with some exceptions, most things are not um, like the metal or the metal in this table. That's a direct good,
Yep.
right? I I clearly state the specifications of what I want this metal to look like, what the concentration of iron versus nickel or whatever, and what the tensile strength is and how long it needs to be. So in that instance, and you're comparing true like to like, you're more inclined to focus on only one dimension of value, which is price, right?
Yep.
But there are other
Correct.
things that you want to put in there. Capacity to deliver, shipping costs. Is it going to damage? Who's going to be the escalation point? Those are things that have value independent of price. Most things that an organization's buy don't have that strict type of tolerance or that sort of specifications. And there's also a notion in procurement in every group is direct versus indirect spend. Direct spend are the purchasing of things that go directly in the finished product. Indirect is everything else.
Yeah.
So I've spent my career focusing on indirect because it's one, more interesting, and two, it's more fun. Because otherwise it's just boring. I just simply list requirements and then you go and do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so when you're buying indirect spend, it touches everybody in the organization, even if it's an office supply contract, right? You think it's just office supplies. Well, everybody in the company buys office supplies, or everyone in the company uses temporary help, or everybody in the company uses X, Y, or Z. That's indirect spend. It touches all those things. So price is a consideration, but the ability to deliver, that's more important. The cultural fit, right?
Yep.
If you have the lowest price, but your account managers are rude to the CEO's secretary,
Oh yeah.
guess how that's going to work, right? So cultural fit, does it align with what you have? Does their ability to deliver, do they have experience in our industry? Does the proposal demonstrate a competence? Is it in line with what we say? How do they handle themselves in the meeting? Do they bring the CEO or they bring just the local account manager? If they come into the room, do I know who my account manager is going to be on a day-to-day basis, or is it just the salespeople and they're going to go off into the distance, right? What are the terms of the contract itself? Do they agree to the most of our contractual terms, or are they going to redline it all to hell and gone? So, we're going to be, in contract hell forever.
Yeah.
So price is a small thing. Another thing to remember is, and this is something for anybody who sells to an enterprise, is you have to recognize that the number one goal of everybody who has that buyer seat is program adoption. Okay, so what do
Okay.
I mean by program adoption? Program adoption means how many people in the organization are buying the service that you bought on behalf of the company the way that you want them to buy it, right? You're following my approved supplier channel,
Yes.
okay?
Yeah.
If I negotiate the best possible contract with the cheapest possible rate, but my adoption is terrible, guess what? My savings are not going to go and I'm going to be unemployed.
Yeah.
So that's why, recognizing that it's a sales role and working with enterprises, you need to think of them as an extension of your sales team and you arm them with sales tools, and that recognizing that they want you to succeed is really key to the difference, because so often it's adversarial,
Yeah.
and we work with companies to kind of make sure they understand that it's not.
Cool. Cool. Well, I think I love that, by the way, because that's super interesting to me. And I think it's also super interesting to the listeners and things like that. But for who's your ideal avatar? What type of company do you get the most results for? Because I know
Mhm.
this is just kind of like one portion of
Yeah.
things that you do. It's not the whole thing.
Well, we like one, Almost all of the work that we do, and while we do work with other types of companies, right, is all based on human capital, the future of work.
Yeah.
So our practice, while it's limited there, it's not constrained to there. Currently, because that's just where we spent most of our time. Those are our clients, but we're really interested, and we work with a lot of other types of companies. So our ideal company is usually an HR technology or a staffing firm or a services firm of some kind.
Yep.
Usually, they involve some element of technology, and they are interested in increasing their sales, finding investment, and penetrating enterprise clients.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so those are really our sweet spot because I've spent so much time working in this space and advising companies how to do it. We're really successful with translating that experience into revenue generation for these guys,
Right. Right.
right? And so the perfect company that we work with is, smaller to medium size. We also work with large companies from time to time. We have offerings for large companies too. Small to medium, technology focused, service based, and they're interested in growing their business. And they're finding that the current sales strategies just aren't working.
Yeah.
The traditional smile and dial isn't just working.
Right.
And so we work with them to develop a whole new way to present the market and a whole new way to sell. And then in some instances, we help them. We help them in the sales cycle because oftentimes I'll dial in with a client, and because a lot of them may know me or they know I'm able to speak that language.
Yeah.
So I often get involved in the sales, physically get involved sometimes in the sales cycle if it's the right opportunity, in the right company, because I'm really cognizant of protecting, the personal brand, as it were.
And when you say small to medium, is that like 50 to 100 employees?
Yeah,
or?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, small to medium, 100%.
Okay.
We, like I said, we have a couple of clients who are even smaller than that.
Yeah.
We work with a couple of nonprofits who specialize in putting people to work,
Yeah.
who are coming in at challenging circumstances.
Cool. So last question.
Uh-oh.
And this has to do with AI, because I know you said like there still needs to be human to human element. What are your thoughts on that? Because at the moment, there's a lot of people saying that it's going to eliminate jobs.
Yes.
And then there's a lot of people saying that it's going to create a lot of new jobs.
Yes. The answer is yes.
To both. Yeah. Yeah.
There are certainly things that are going to be affected, right? And there are certain jobs that will be negatively affected by the rise of artificial intelligence. And even, I mean, we've been covering this since 2010, and I remember thinking it was all hokum. It was just another buzzword.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
as you really dug into it, and we see with the rise of Chat GPT and GPT-4 and Adepto and any of the other number of things, one, the way I think it's going to affect jobs is there will be careers that are affected. Jobs that are really dependent on pattern recognition, on road activities, things that are easily focused on intelligence, which is different than comprehension and consciousness.
Yeah.
Those are going to be threatened. So you've heard the trope: truck drivers, waiters, service industries, things like that. But and I think we have some statistics right here that one in 7 jobs are going to be negative, are going to be positively affected or be created, and there's 1 in 4 that will have no effect whatsoever. So there are elements of work that will not be affected, but I think the fact is no one really knows.
Yeah.
If you think about it right now, like 85%, or what is it, the statistic? 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 don't exist now.
Yeah.
If you think about it, if you go back 20 years, there was no jobs related to anything internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's true. Yeah.
So while there is going to be disruption, there's going to be people that are disrupted. But the way that I look at this is that artificial intelligence and technology is actually just the most momentous opportunity for all of us. And this plays back into where we started. So I'm glad you asked this question, because technology, artificial intelligence specifically, is a force multiplier. If used correctly, it allows the individual, you and me,
Yeah.
to look like a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah. That's true.
And so if we recognize that now is the best possible time, really, to one, want to be alive. I think I believe that.
Yeah.
But I think also to recognize that if you ever wanted to go out on your own and start your own business, there has never been a better time than now. The future of work is portable and based on the individual. And recognizing that there is nothing holding you back, and there has never been a time in human history where there are more opportunities for people to make money than there are now.
Yeah.
You can drive an Uber. You can get freelance jobs on Fiverr or Upwork. You could open a company in an airport lounge, and then then affect the world.
Yeah.
And leveraging technology, you can do those sorts of things. And if people really recognize that and take that on as something to be embraced as opposed to be feared, it's going to be the better for it. Change is inevitable.
Yeah.
I remember when I first started my very first job, someone threw an article in my hand about how the internet was going to ruin the career of procurement or purchasing. And now, 25, 30 years later, it's more important than ever as
Right,
more and more
right.
companies buy more stuff, right? So artificial intelligence, AI, while it's certainly going to affect the change, it's going to make the things that we used to value less more important.
Yeah.
Creativity, like there's a quote about how over the last 50 years we've tried to make people more machine-like,
Yep.
and now this next phase is going to be making machines more human-like,
Yeah, that's so true.
and putting the human back in human, as it were.
Well, dude, I had a phenomenal time, speaking. Thank you so much for being
Thank
on the
you.
show. Where can people find you?
You can find me at defiantsolutions.com. That's our website, and that has all the information. I have a chat function, and we have people looking at that every day. So just go to our website, defiantsolutions.com, or that's the best way to reach us. That's
Cool.
our website. Thanks
Well,
so
thank you
much.
so much for being here.
Thank you. Awesome.
Cool. Let's take a quick picture here, and then after.